She looked my father and the vice principal dead in the eye and said the 4 words that sealed her fate. She never asked for help. A cold, confident lie. But I had a secret. A secret tucked away in my backpack. 3 documents, covered in her own looping, aggressive red ink, that would not just prove she was a liar. They were about to end her career. If you believe that the truth always finds a way to the surface, and that bullies eventually get what's coming to them, then prove it by hitting that subscribe button right now. Give this video a like, because you are about to witness a masterclass in poetic justice, where the weapon used against me became the very evidence that brought my tormentor crashing down. Let's get into the story. High school, for the most part, was my safe zone. 10 years ago, I was the kind of student teachers dream of. Quiet, attentive, always with my nose in a book. I wasn't the prom queen or the star quarterback. My world was smaller, more focused. I had a tight-knit group of friends. I got decent grades. I swam for the school team before the sun was up, and I wrote for the student newspaper after the last bell rang. Life was balanced, predictable, calm. My real passion was reading. I devoured books like I needed them. For oxygen. My freshman English teacher saw this in me and pushed me onto the honors track. For 2.5 years, it was bliss. I was in my element, discussing complex themes, writing essays I was proud of. And then, in the second semester of my junior year, the calm waters of my high school life turned into a raging storm. I was placed in a class called Classical Literature. On paper, this was a dream come true. I adored Greek and Roman mythology. I had already read the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and a dozen other classics on my own time. I didn't even mind rereading them for a grade. What I did mind, what I would come to loathe with every fiber of my being, was the teacher. Let's call her Ms. Umbridge. She was the living embodiment of a wolf in sheep's clothing. To the rest of the school, she projected this facade of a sweet, doting educator, all smiles and pastel cardigans. But behind the closed door of her classroom, a switch flipped. The sweetness curdled into something sour and cruel. And for some reason, I still can't explain to this day, she decided that I was her enemy. What was my great transgression? I honestly don't know. Maybe it was the fact that I sometimes nodded off in class. Looking back, I know I had undiagnosed thyroid issues that left me perpetually exhausted, and getting up at 5 a.m. for swim practice didn't exactly help, but it was a rare thing, happening maybe twice a month across all my classes combined. I don't even have a specific memory of it happening in her class. But that's the only thing I can think of. Whatever the reason, her dislike for me wasn't just a passive feeling. It was an active, burning hatred, and she was about to make it her personal mission to ruin my academic life. Her class grading was simple. 50% of our grade came from essays and written reports. The rest was just quizzes and a couple of tests. As a writer for the student paper, this was my strong suit. I wasn't worried. I figured maintaining a B was a foregone conclusion. Then we turned in our first paper. I remember getting it back. The single stark letter at the top, circled in that vicious red ink, D. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process. A D? The only class I'd ever remotely struggled in was chemistry, and even in my worst moments there, my lowest grade had been a C. A D in English felt like a physical blow. The paper was handed back with almost no feedback, just a few cryptic, unhelpful marks. At the end of it, one sentence, an uninspired assessment of the material. My heart hammered against my ribs. I waited for the bell, my hands trembling slightly as I packed my bag. I approached her desk as the other students flooded out. "Miss Umbridge?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. I don't understand my grade. Can you tell me what I did wrong?" She looked up from her papers, that fake sweet smile plastered on her face. "Your work was simply uninspired, dear." "Okay," I said, trying to stay calm. Can you show me an example of what an inspired assessment would look like? So I know for next time." The smile tightened. "Come back during study hall." I felt a flicker of hope. Okay, she was tough, but maybe she was willing to help me one-on-one. I got a pass and went to her classroom during my study hall, expecting to see example essays, maybe a rubric I'd missed. There were no examples. There was no rubric. For 1 solid hour, she didn't teach me. She dismantled me. She didn't critique my writing. She critiqued me. She told me I was lazy, that my thinking was shallow, that I clearly wasn't cut out for the intellectual rigor of her class. She used words like pedestrian, juvenile, and disappointing. It wasn't constructive criticism. It was a targeted psychological assault. I remember walking out of that room, finding a deserted hallway, and just crying. The hot, silent tears of utter confusion and humiliation. She hadn't given me a single tool to improve. She had just confirmed that, in her eyes, I was an idiot. That's when my best friend, let's call her Anna, stepped in. Anna was our school's future valedictorian. She was wickedly smart, fiercely loyal, and never got a grade below an A- on anything. Ever. When she saw me crying, she went from concerned friend to avenging angel. "No way," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Absolutely not. Give me your next paper. We're doing it together." And we did. We spent hours in the library, poring over the text, crafting arguments, and polishing every single sentence. Anna, the academic prodigy, basically co-wrote it with me. We were both convinced it was a masterpiece. It was her typical A+ work. I turned it in feeling a renewed sense of confidence. I got another D. This time, I wasn't just sad. I was numb. But Anna was furious. "This is impossible," she seethed, snatching the paper from my hands. "This is A+ work. I know it is." She wasn't just guessing. She took the paper straight to her own AP English teacher, Mr. Davison, a man universally respected for his high standards. She told him a little white lie that she was thinking of entering a writing competition and wanted his feedback. Mr. Davison read it carefully. He handed it back to her with a nod. "This is excellent, Anna. Your typical A+ work. Definitely enter it." The gears in Anna's brilliant mind were turning. "Can I ask you something else?" she said. She had me print a copy of my first paper. The one I wrote alone. She took that to him too. "What about this one?" He read it over. "This one is also very good. I'd probably give it an A-. The other one is a bit stronger, but this is solid A-level writing." Anna came back to me, her face grim. "Okay," she said. "It's not you, it's her. She hates you for some reason, and she's failing you on purpose." The idea was so alien to me. A teacher not liking me? Sure, some were more distant than others, but active, malicious dislike? It had never happened. Anna urged me to go to my parents, to my counselor, but a part of me, a naive, stubborn part, needed to try one last time. This time, however, I wasn't going in blind. This time, I'd be setting a trap. Despite the horror of our first session, I forced myself to go to Miss Umbridge for help on the third paper. Not once, but 3 separate times during study hall before it was due. Each time, I'd bring her my draft. Each time, she'd take out her favorite red pen and slash through my words, making suggestions, crossing out entire paragraphs. She was so smug, so sure of her power over me. I sat there, nodding, taking meticulous notes, and all the while, I was carefully, secretly, saving each of those revised drafts, each one a piece of evidence, covered in her own condemnatory red ink. By the time the final paper was due, I had a small portfolio of failure, curated by my own tormentor. I turned in the final version, a paper she had essentially guided from start to finish. The result? A D+. She handed it back to me with a smirk that I can still see clear as day. "Congratulations on your improvement," she chirped. That was it. The snap you hear when a branch is bent too far. The quiet, laid-back part of me went dormant, and something else took its place. A cold, crystalline rage. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't confused. I was pissed. Royally, monumentally pissed. My friend was right. This woman, this vindictive, petty bully, was intentionally torpedoing my future, and I was done playing her game. My first stop was my newspaper teacher. He wasn't an English teacher, but our paper was constantly winning state-level awards under his guidance. The man knew good writing. I didn't tell him the whole story, not yet. I just said I was having trouble in English and asked if he could look over my paper and give me some advice. He read it, a slightly confused look on his face. "Why aren't you asking your English teacher?" he asked. But he read it anyway. He made a few minor suggestions, small tweaks here and there. Then he handed it back. "This is great work," he said. "Really strong." I held my breath. Do you think it's a B or better?" He laughed. "A B? I'd give this an A. Not a perfect 100, maybe, but a solid, unquestionable A." That was all I needed to hear. I went back to Anna, and we started to brainstorm. This wasn't college. You couldn't just drop a class. The bureaucracy at my high school was a fortress. But then Anna had a flash of inspiration. "The athletes," she said. "The football and basketball guys. They get moved to easier classes all the time to keep their GPAs up so they can stay eligible to play." A light bulb went off. My eligibility. My dad was friends with the school's athletics director. It was a long shot, but it was a shot. I requested a meeting after school with the AD and my swim coach. I sat in the AD's office, my hands clasped in my lap, and I laid it all out. I explained that I was in danger of getting a D in a class, which would make me ineligible to swim for the team. I told them I wanted to move classes, but I knew I'd need a good reason. They were sympathetic but professional. "Have you asked the teacher for help?" the AD asked. "Yes," I said. "I've asked for help from multiple people, but my grade just isn't improving. I don't know what else to do." They exchanged a look. "Can we see the papers?" my coach asked gently. I handed over the stack. The two of them, a tough-as-nails coach and a seasoned administrator, sat there and read my D and D+ papers. I watched their faces shift from concern to confusion. They looked up at me, then at the papers, then back at me. "I don't get it," the AD said, shaking his head. "These are good." The student vice principal was called in. The meeting was getting bigger. The VP, a no-nonsense man named Mr. Harris, listened to the story. He asked who had helped me. I told him about Anna, our valedictorian, and how her AP English teacher had confirmed the grades should be A's. I told him about my newspaper teacher's assessment. Then came the million-dollar question from the VP. "Did you ever actually ask your teacher, Miss Umbridge, for help?" I let a small, genuine smile touch my lips for the first time all day. "Yes, sir. I did." I reached into my backpack, my heart pounding a steady, triumphant rhythm. In fact, she helped me revise this last paper 3 times. I pulled out the 3 drafts and laid them on the desk. The VP frowned as he saw them, covered from top to bottom in Miss Umbridge's distinctive red ink. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The vague concern was replaced by a grim, focused seriousness. The gears of the administration began to turn with terrifying speed. The AP English teacher and my newspaper teacher were summoned to the office. One by one, they were asked to grade my papers. With no context, the verdict was unanimous. All 3 papers were graded as A- or better. While this was happening, the AD called my dad. My quiet, gentle father listened to the story, and a side of him I had rarely seen came roaring to life. He arrived at the school absolutely livid. His voice was low and dangerous. He demanded that I be moved to another class immediately, and that Miss Ranbridge be put under formal review. "This isn't about a tough grader," I heard him say to the VP. "This is about a teacher who is grading a student based on a personal grudge, not their work, and I will not stand for it." The school administration, naturally, bristled at the accusation. They protect their own. I was asked to leave the VP's office, as I heard raised voices begin to fill the air. 6 grown men were in there, arguing, yelling. I could hear snippets through the door, words like unsubstantiated, protocol, and clear evidence. It was decided there would be a meeting. The next morning, before school started, me, my dad, the VP, and the athletics director, and Ms. Umbridge. We all gathered in the VP's office. The air was thick with tension. Miss Umbridge walked in with an air of supreme confidence. She clearly thought this meeting was for her to finally, officially tell everyone how stupid and lazy I was. She sat down, gave me a dismissive glance, and folded her hands on the table, a smug little smile playing on her lips. The VP started. Ms. Umbridge, we're here because if this student maintains a D in your class, she will lose her extracurricular eligibility. We need to discuss a path forward. She smirked. That god-awful, condescending smirk. Well, she began, her voice dripping with false concern, I think the best path forward would be to move her to the non-honors English track. She simply doesn't have the aptitude to understand the complex classical literature we're studying. Frankly, she'd probably need a private tutor to even get through the basic curriculum. I watched my father's face turn a shade of red I had never seen before. I genuinely thought I was about to see steam pour out of his ears. The VP remained calm, his face like stone. And you didn't feel it was your responsibility to help her improve? It's up to the students to put in the initiative to get better, she said primly. The VP leaned forward slightly. So, to be perfectly clear, you're saying she never came to you, never asked you for help? That is correct, Miss Umbridge said, looking him right in the eye. She did not. The trap snapped shut. The VP slowly, deliberately, reached into a manila folder on his desk. He pulled out the 3 revised versions of my third paper and slid them across the table. They fanned out right in front of her, a triptych of her own lies, written in her own blood-red ink. Her face went from smug pink to blotchy crimson in a nanosecond. The color drained away, then rushed back in a wave of pure, panicked rage. She's a liar, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. Those notes aren't mine. She forged them. The room erupted. My dad started yelling. The AD started yelling. And Miss Umbridge just kept shouting that I was a liar. I was quickly asked to leave again. I sat on the hard bench outside the office. This time the school secretary was at her desk, and we both sat in stunned silence, listening to the full-blown shouting match happening behind the closed door. School was set to start in 30 minutes, and the senior administration was in a screaming war with a teacher. Then, the AP English teacher and the newspaper teacher were called back in. More shouting. About 5 minutes before the first bell, the teachers left. I was called back in, as Ms. Umbridge stormed out of the VP's office. Her face was a mask of pure hatred. If looks could kill, I would have been a pile of ash on the linoleum floor. The VP looked exhausted, but his voice was firm. You're being moved to a standard-level English class. Effective immediately, he told me. Your current grade will not carry over. You won't have to make up any past assignments. Your new teacher will be instructed to grade you only on the work you do from this point forward. My new teacher ended up being a woman named Ms. Honey, the head of the entire English department. She was in her late 60s, with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority that came from decades of command over classroom. After 2.5 years of honors English, her class was, frankly, easier than PE. But I refused to coast. I refused to let Ms. Honey, or anyone, think for a second that Ms. Umbridge had been right about me. I worked harder in that basic English class than I had in any class before. I finished projects weeks early. It got to the point where Ms. Honey asked me to start tutoring another girl in the class who was struggling. I spent half of every class period helping this girl go from a C- to a solid B+. I finished the semester with 104% in the class. On the last day of the semester, Ms. Honey called me to her desk. She was officially recommending that I return to the honors English track for my senior year. I must have looked terrified, because she immediately put a hand on my arm. Don't worry, she said softly. Miss Umbridge will not be your teacher. She paused, her eyes holding mine. In fact, she will not be anyone's teacher. She is leaving at the end of the school year. Miss Umbridge was only in her late 20s and unmarried. This wasn't retirement. Our school district was one of the best paying in the state. People didn't just leave. I knew what it meant. Miss Honey continued, explaining what I had suspected. You were put in my class on purpose, she said. The administration trusted me to determine the truth of Miss Umbridge's claims that you were not suited for honors work. Well, she said with a warm smile, I have reported to them that you very clearly belong in honors English. I apologize if my class was not challenging enough for you this semester. And that's when I broke. All the tension, the fear, the anger, and the doubt that I had bottled up for months came pouring out. I ugly cried, full on, snot and tears, shuddering sobs, because I hadn't realized until that exact moment that a part of me, a deep, terrified part, had actually started to believe Miss Umbridge. I had started to believe that I was stupid, uninspired, and worthless. Miss Honey didn't say a word. She just got up, came around her desk, and gave me a hug while I cried it all out. It was the ultimate validation. It was the moment the poison was finally drawn out. I spent my senior year back in honors English, and I spent my study halls tutoring struggling students in Miss Honey's classroom. To this day, my career is heavily based in writing, and that awful woman's voice still sometimes whispers in the back of my head, making me obsessively second-guess my own work. She didn't just give me bad grades, she wreaked havoc on my self-confidence, and it took years to rebuild. I hope for the sake of any other quiet, hard-working student who might have crossed her path that she never ever taught again. A terrible teacher can feel like an unbeatable boss in a video game. Who was the most unjust teacher you ever had? And how did you deal with them? Share your stories of classroom justice in the comments below. We all need to hear them, as always. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales of ultimate revenge and hard-won vindication. Thanks for listening.